Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond. We are right here in the peak of the summer, and let me tell you, these bass are active. They're literally going airborne. Got a lot of cool things coming up in this video with them. And speaking of airborne, we decided to go fishing with a drone, and that went exactly like you would expect. We're also going to be adding more bait fish to the pond. This time we're going with a bulkier size, adult golden shiners. But I'll have to say I got pretty concerned when the 5-acre pond turned into chocolate milk overnight. And keep in mind we hadn't had any rain, so it's not mud, but after talking to the biologist, we think we got it figured out. So back in the early spring, we had crystal clear water, which created a lot of aquatic growth, and we treated that with a beneficial bacteria to help starve that out, which worked perfectly, and shortly after that we fertilized the pond and got that green plankton bloom that we had been trying to achieve. And if you're not familiar with it, that phytoplankton is a key component to raising big bass. It starts at the microscopic level, where that plankton feeds all the small insects and fish, which in turn feed the bigger fish in the pond. And you can see here we had a nice bloom with a visibility around 19 inches. And phytoplankton starts the life cycle of a pond and is the basis of a food chain. And once you have a healthy population, it begins feeding these microscopic animals or insects called zooplankton. And as the zooplankton numbers increase, the phytoplankton begins to die off, and that's when you'll notice the pond turn from that olive green color to the darkish brown. But as I mentioned, this is good news and part of the life cycle because that zooplankton is what feeds the bluegills and all the smaller fish in the pond. So even though it may not look like good news when you walk out to the pond and it looks like there's paint floating on the surface, that's just nature going through its cycles, and as that plankton's dying off, it's helping to feed everything in the food chain and making this pond extremely fertile. And again, the only downside that typically can come from this is it could create dissolved oxygen problems. That's why we're keeping the volcano pump running 24/7. But it's important to understand this biology because oftentimes it can help prevent fish kills. One of my friends, Daniel Arms, from Arms Family Homestead, just texted me a week ago where the majority of the bass in his pond died from oxygen-related issues. So it's best if you can learn as much as you can about these ponds to prevent those disasters from happening. But now let's check in on Cedar Falls, which is a completely different type of pond and clear water ecosystem. But if you've been watching the channel, you know my favorite thing to do is walk over here by the waterfall. It stirs up all the golden shiners, and you're guaranteed some action. So we got the 3 bass in here, Johnny and June, and then our pet bass tiger that we moved out of the 300-gallon aquarium. But throughout the summer months, the bass's metabolism is extremely high, so they eat more this time of year. And just like with our backyard pond, we're stocking about 1,000 golden shiners in here every week. But I also started putting some underwater cameras in here because I'm amazed by how fast these bass can swim in comparison to the golden shiner. And the shiners are a schooling type of fish, so they pretty much swim together and are protected by numbers. But the underwater cameras don't do any good when the bass goes airborne and completely jumps over it. You gotta love it. Here's another cool shot where a school of bait is hanging out under the lilies. And anytime they're not over there by the waterfall, it's pretty much open season because the bass can access any other part of the pond. And there's a shot at the tilapia. Those have been a great addition to the pond. With the increased temperatures, a lot of times you have excess algae. And with them eating it 24/7, they're really helping keep it under control. And tilapia do have a nice looking color scheme to them. You can see this one's blue and yellow and purple. Man, it's crazy to think that there's that many shiners in here right now. And when I come back in a week, there'll just be a handful. But the bass aren't the only things eating them. We had this little guy show up, and I'm not 100% sure what type of bird this is. If you know, leave it in a comment down below. But there's a few of these friendly little guys hanging out around the 5-acre pond and this pond. And even though they have that long beak, they're targeting those small fish, so we don't mind them hanging around. So now let's check in on one of my favorite parts of Cedar Falls, and that's up here at the wetland filter with all the tropical lilies, and home of the 2 smallest bass, Truman and Houdini. But there's always an abundance of food source. Right here around the wetland filter, you can see the spiders, dragonflies, and just all the bugs and insects are attracted to this area. But it's time to feed them something a little more substantial, and toss a couple shiners in. There's one of the little guys lurking around. Come on out, Truman. Time to eat. There Oh, and he thought about it for a second. Got him. And here's an underwater shot of it. A lot of times they'll just attack the shiner, dart away, and then reposition it and swallow it. But the really unique thing about these two small bass is we caught them when they were 1 day old. And the interesting thing is, the prawns that we have over in the prawn tank are the perfect feeding size for these little guys. So every week I'll put a handful of prawns in here. Can you imagine being fed a heavy protein diet from day one? These two little guys could become the quickest 10-pounders ever. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So Nate Make stopped by the farm today to do a little fishing, and you know he's always up for a challenge. So he came to me with the idea of let's go fishing with a drone. And since I knew that the drone can carry up to 8 pounds, I said sure, why not, let's give it a shot. So we started out by tying one end of an extra long leader line to the base of the drone, and then we tied a whopper plopper on the other end, just thinking that a floating topwater lure and keep from getting snagged if the drone did stop. So starting out, I'll have to say I was pretty impressed. The plan seemed to be working out perfectly. I was even flying the drone in reverse so we could get an up-close shot, just in case we got a big topwater strike. And it was a little difficult to navigate, but the good thing was I could see all the structure piles down in the pond, and I knew right where to drag the bait over. So it was about this time that things took a turn. We saw some fish hitting on the other side of the pond, so we decided to lift the bait up in the air, and we were going to fly it over to the back side of the dam and get it close to that strike zone. Well, the one thing I did not take into account was the weight of the whopper plopper wasn't heavy enough to keep the fishing line tight. So whenever I started lowering the drone down, that little bit of slack in the line got caught in the propellers, and here you go. The drone is down.
To be honest, I wasn't expecting a recovery mission this fast.
We were thinking at least a fish would drag it in first, but the whopper plopper was tied on, so we should be able to recover it. Should be a drone on the other end of it.
She did make
the lights on.
Just turn it on for me.
Wait, battery back here is still showing full battery.
She got a little wet.
Oh, the line is cut. Is it?
Oh, yeah.
The line is cut.
The line is cut. It just wrapped around there. It's the only thing that saved it. Fast propeller. Wow, we got lucky there. Especially if this thing is recoverable. A little bit of water in there.
Yeah, that one's full.
Alright, now let's check in on the prawn tank. You can absolutely tell that the average size of the prawns is going up week to week. And there's even some of those big males that hang out down there in the bottom that have already started developing those long pinchers that can end up being 6 to 8 inches long. But last year, starting about the beginning of August, I started batch feeding and taking a few pounds at a time out of the prawn pond and putting it in the 5-acre pond. But this year, now that the bass have gotten a little bit bigger, I think we're going to extend that feeding time because these protein pellets put the weight on them quick. And we're going to try to get as many adults as possible before we transition them over to the 5-acre pond. So I may have to get a couple of additional containers because prawns will begin eating each other if they don't have enough food source. And today's video is brought to you by PDS Debt. Millions of Americans have been affected by the rising cost of living and inflation, and now it's easier than ever to get into debt with credit cards, personal loans, and medical bills. If you're making payments every month and your balances aren't going down, PDS Debt has a solution for you. Anyone with over $10,000 of eligible debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. And PDS is giving you a free debt savings analysis just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/BamaBass. You'll receive a full breakdown on how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. PDS Debt strives to understand your specific scenario and can help provide alternative solutions to becoming debt-free. Start by clicking the link in the video description or going to pdsdebt.com/BamaBass. And let's get back to that happy, stress-free living, folks. So now we're going to look at an overhead view of one of the bluegill feeders right before it goes off. And if you missed the last video, we talked a lot about whether or not these bass are targeting any of these bluegills or if they're just eating other bait fish like the threadfin shad. So I've started paying attention to all the feeding areas Because if a bass is going to target a bluegill, they're going to pick the most opportune time, and that's obviously when they're all huddled together, frantically chasing those little pellets. But the one thing that I found that I'm still scratching my head about is I'm 99% positive that a few of these bass are up there eating the protein pellets. And at first I thought that's got to be some of the rainbow trout, because they feed heavily on the pellets. But after looking at some of the drone footage and the feeder cams, I'm almost positive these bass are eating pellets. So we do have some chasing bluegills, but pay attention to this one right here in this shallow area. A lot of times the wind will blow a few extra pellets right up there on the weed line, and you can see this one continuing to go up there with his mouth open right at the surface. Here's another shot I got where you'll see the bass is just coming up to the top of the water. No bluegill flying out, just opening his mouth up, gathering that feed. And I just think that that is wild. And it's not uncommon for bass to be feed trained on pellets, but you typically have to introduce it to them when they're juveniles, or else they'll never become interested. So that's a new one to me. But like I mentioned, we also do have some bass targeting the bluegills. Here you'll see a couple clips where the bass knock the bluegill up in the air, which is a good sign because they do need to start eating that bigger bait. All right, we're going to be adding some golden shiners to the pond. I got some much bigger size shiners, as you can see there, than we typically put in. So we're going to get these guys acclimated, and there's some big ones mixed into there. Just going to take them and set them right here up under this tree to acclimate in about 15-20 minutes. We might go release them over there in the deep end where all that grass is. All right, so I'm going to release one bag of them right here in all this grass where they can get up under it and hide. And the thoughts are we're going to have some of these bigger shiners get in here and spawn and have a bunch of babies. You can see they're all real nice size, so adults. But even if a bass does eat them, it's a good snack for them to put the weight on. A few that didn't survive, but overall I'd say about 90-95% of them made it. So oftentimes pond owners will introduce golden shiners in the fall because the golden shiners can compete with the bluegills and other bait fish for food. And they're also egg eaters and can target nesting sites like the bluegill and bass nesting sites. So we're going to gradually start adding them and see how they do, and then we may get a big truckload of them this fall. But there's one thing for sure, I know the bass love them, especially when they're up here on the surface doing that shiner dance, which is just irresistible to a bass. And as you'll see here in a minute when we start fishing with a spook, the bass cannot resist it. Alright, I put one sack of them over here at the waterfall. We'll feed these to the bass tonight. Well, we'll get some jumbos in this batch. It should be a good feeding this afternoon. Alright, we're going to watch some of this fish feeding action, and I'll explain why we went up to a larger size shiner. So in our last video, I caught a few fish that were on the skinny side. They weren't unhealthy, they're just not as fat as they should be in a fertile pond like this. So if you ever want to raise bass to that trophy size of 8 or 10 pounds, it's important to really pay attention to two factors. The first one is overcrowding, and the second is not enough forage food. So the first thing we'll talk about is overcrowding, and we only stocked 75 bass per acre, which is less than a lot of people recommend at 100 bass per acre. And so typically you don't start seeing overcrowding to around the 3rd or 4th year, and that's when you have to start removing bass out of the pond, because each year after the bass spawn, the numbers increase and they start competing with each other for food. Now the second thing we'll talk about is having enough bait fish. And if you guys have seen the pond over the past couple years, we're constantly stocking threadfin shad, tilapia, prawns, and weekly golden shiners. So I don't think we have a lack of bait fish, but I think it's more so the size of the bait fish that the bass are targeting. So as a bass gets bigger and bigger, it needs to eat a bait fish that's roughly 1/3 of the size of its length. So a lot of these fish are around that 15-inch mark. They need to be eating 5-inch bait fish. So that's why we're going to introduce the larger golden shiners that are roughly 4 to 5 inches and help those bass transition off the smaller minnows and smaller threadfin shad into the bigger bait fish and even bluegills. But as I mentioned, it shouldn't be lack of bait. If you look out there across the pond, you'll see all of those schools of threadfin shad. Alright, out here at the pond, getting the USS Sarah rigged up. The primary reason for going out today is we're going to use this Garmin with a side scanner, and we'll go through the pond and scan to the left and right and see how many bait balls we have out there and where they're located. Most of them are probably going to be hanging around those structure points or either out there in the deep water. Also got this on top to be able to record the data. You'll be able to see exactly what I'm seeing here on the screen. And we're not playing around with batteries today. We've got the Dakota Lithium 200 amp hour That would probably power this trolling motor for about 1.5 years, maybe even 2 years. So if you never looked at a fish graph before, the screens are split into two, the left side and right side. And on the left side, it's just a view of what's directly beneath the boat. So the black area represents the water, the orange is the bottom, and all the little blue and orange specks are fish. And the right half of the screen is the side scan. And again, black is the water, and the orange area to the left of it is scanning 40 feet to the left side of the boat, and the orange to the right of it scanning 40 feet to the right side of the boat. And this particular area is holding a lot of fish, most likely bass, and it's right here around that feed trough. Alright, now we're going to see what it looks like when we ride by one of the underwater diffusers that are pumping oxygen into the pond from the bottom. I also swapped modes. You can see here there's even a few fish hanging out at the top. But this is what we're looking for. Those big blue clouds are balls of bait fish. And that's the main reason I'm trolling around today. I just want to see how much bait we have left in the pond. So here's a really productive deep spot in the pond. There's a lot of fish hanging out around the bottom at that 7-foot mark. And I've been getting a lot of questions about the rainbow trout. And I suspect there's a lot of them still alive. They're just hanging out down in the deepest part of the pond where it's the coolest. But another thing I was really surprised to see is those black holes are fish beds. And that's pretty common in any pond. But what's not so common in a bass pond is for them to be 8 feet deep. And so I'm 99% sure that those are tilapia beds, because typically bass always spawn in the shallow parts. Alright, we got another big bait ball. A lot of fish hanging out down beneath it. And here's a look of driving directly over Terry's tunnels. You can see that stacked triangle we made. And there's a really good look at what we call the feed trough. That's the big circular cattle trough we sank with a bunch of treetops in the middle of it. There's some fish beds, most likely tilapia. If you look at that third bed from the bottom, that little white dot is a fish. Now here's a deep underwater brush pile we added. Also got some fish hanging out around it. And I found several more balls of bait, especially when you notice a depth change. That seems to be where the bait balls are hanging around when it goes from shallow down to deep pretty quick. Now let's see what it looks like when we ride by the big volcano pump. So if you want to see what dissolved oxygen looks like on the graph, that's it. It basically looks like static or noise. It's probably interfering with the sonar. But you can see the volcano pump is doing its job. Now that's probably the biggest school of bass I've seen on the pond. We built a road bed where we dug out each side of it, and the bass are hanging out just on the back side of the road bed. So I got to see exactly what I needed to see. Plenty of bait in the pond. Got to see where they were hanging out. But if your graph ever looks like this, you are in a honey hole. We're sitting right here out in front of the dock, and there's hundreds of fish on the left, right, and beneath the boat. So if you ever come across this, anchor down right here in this spot. We got Mr. Oliver hanging out here on the back porch. So now's the perfect time to go check in on the backyard pond and Mr. Moby. And it looks like an absolute jungle out here. All the plant life is at its peak in the summertime. We got Mr. Moby hanging out in the deep end. Also got a couple of those big bluegills, but the over-the-top view just doesn't do it justice. Let's put some underwater cameras in and see how everybody's doing. There's Mr. Moby. It's feeding day and everybody's happy, including one of the Ninja Turtles. But I'm pretty sure I learn something every time I put the cameras underwater. So one of the little lily pots that fell over into the pond has now become a nesting site for one of the bluegills. I guess they're just looking for something different. They always need a hard bottom, but that's a first for me, a bluegill spawning on a lily pot. And there's the big black crappie we call Outlaw. And if you're looking at this video saying, man, those look like some big bluegill, you are 100% right. I can assure you that this sunfish right here is over 2 pounds, and I'm tempted to drop a cricket down in there and catch one of them just to weigh it. But back when we caught these guys and introduced them to the pond, they've had such an abundance of golden shiners. Once they adapted over and started eating the shiners, they put the pounds on quick. And here's something interesting. One of the turtles decided he wanted to man the camera for today, and also changed the angle that it was pointed. So he played around with angles a little bit, got it down on the bottom, and then flipped it over facing the sky. And then decided now it was time to do a little selfie. And I have to admit, it's not a bad angle, looking from the bottom of the pond up. I would have never thought to put the camera in there like that. We're even going to get a close-up of one of the big bluegills. And this is how you know Moby's getting old. When he was a young guy, he would have tried to eat every shiner in this pond. But now, he's reaching retirement age where he just hangs out and waits on the easy ones to swim by. Alright, just a few days after that plankton crash, water looks back to normal. We'll get a quick Secchi disc reading right here. About 22 inches. Alright, we got Nate Makes out here with us today, king of the topwater. He said he wanted to throw some spooks out here.
Yes, sir.
We're going to target the areas right out there in front of the feeders. If he catches any, we're going to scan it to see if it's been caught before, and then we'll inject a pit tag if it hadn't. Also get a weight on it and put it in the database. Prime weather for some topwater action.
Let's go.
Alright, while he's fishing, I'm going to get a close-up on this camera so we can see a big topwater blow up.
It's a brand new one.
No, he's been caught. Alright, this fish been caught, 570499. Alright, anyways, 1.69. Alright, this fish is named Viking. We caught it back in April. Nate's getting some that are blowing it up out of the water. That was an impressive hit right there.
Yeah, that one was pretty good.
Alright, this fish is 571141. Alright, he weighs 165. And this fish is named Roscoe. Another fish that's lost a little bit of weight. Something we're going to continue to keep an eye on. That was a two-hitter right there.
That's the ideal spook bite right there.
Yep. Alright, this fish is 570873.
God.
That weighs another 1.69.
Must be the magic number.
Twins. And this fish is named Gabe. It was caught during the Aquascape pond build last year, so we didn't get a weight on it. Alright, this one's 570260. It weighs 1.63.
God, so close.
And this is Mr. Mango. We caught him back in February. Gained a little bit of weight since then. Might be the biggest one yet. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a big female we finally got. Alright, she's been caught, 571258. Alright, Nate got him a 3.59 beauty. That's a nice fish. Alright.
Seems short, don't it?
Yeah, which is good.
It's like a short and fat.
And this big girl is named Poseidon, and it's the 5th time we've caught her. Alright, sun's going down. We may have a couple minutes left, so I told Nate he had to do a drive-by fishing challenge. He only had the time it took to get from here to the other end of the pond. Whoa! Got him.
Oh, it actually worked. I wasn't even paying attention.
Is that a good one too?
No.
Decent. 2-pounder. Got him on the drive-by fish.
On the drive-by.
Alright, 569988. 2.07. And this one's haggardfish. Another one that was caught during the Aquascape pond build by one of the contractors, so we didn't get a weight on it. Alright, down here at the Half Acre, going to be trying out a new product today from Growmaster. It's 2 pounds of minerals, vitamins, and one interesting thing is they even add some dewormer in there. But it's got a good protein percentage. Let's take a look and see what it looks like. Smells like apples. I know they're going to eat that right up. Also going to put some roasted soybeans out here. The bucks are just now in velvet, growing those antlers out, and that'll help them out a lot. I just made them some piles, Mix that soybean and corn in. We'll watch the camera and see what comes out tonight. And a healthy looking doe stopping by to check out the site. And there's Mr. Buck Deer. Good to see him putting on some antler growth. Hope all that protein's helping. Another group of does. Not so sure what to think about that mineral block we had out last week. But I love seeing daytime shots like this, where a group of wildlife's together like the male and female deer with the raccoons. All getting along. And a bachelor group of bucks coming through. Still trying to define the pecking order. And we got a big pregnant doe in the back left. Last year was the first time we've ever had triplets out here. The buck's not wanting to make the raccoons angry. And I don't blame him. He thought about getting a little closer. And he said, nah, it's all yours. Not a lot of updates on the squirrel house. Gus Gus the mouse is still occupying it 100% of the time. He's thinking about making some interior upgrades. Kind of spice the place up a little. Likes to bring all his snacks in and eat them right here around the table. And then sit on the front porch and admire the sunset. So we also put some game cams down in the swamp area. We got some coyotes crossing the creek. More coyote movement right at dark. And hey, we got one of the whistling ducks that showed back up. And a raccoon trying to figure out exactly what this camera's doing down here in the swamp. Alright folks, that's going to wrap up this video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. And feel free to leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see us film in the future. We're also thinking about starting up some new projects. And I'll be giving you an update on them in the next video. But I hope y'all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.